people who think James Hansen is sane, and gentlemen. By now you've all heard the so-called WikiLeaks scandal where Julian Assange and company have released about 250,000 cables of information various governments would rather not see the light of day. I'm not here to discuss the ethics of those documents being revealed, but instead some of the information uncovered that verifies some of my previous suspicions about these various climate conferences held every so often in various parts of the world. It's been my contention that most of these conferences are not about science, but instead about a new world order gaining a foothold, pushed by corrupt organizations like the UN. These conferences are more about wheeling and dealing with other people's money. Some of the WikiLeaks cables reveal that the Obama administration was more than willing to buy votes for some sort of climate accord. Imagine the liberal caterwauling if Bush was using foreign aid to suppress support for a climate treaty. The Obama administration pushed hard to get so-called basic countries, Brazil, South Africa, China, and India, on board with a climate treaty. In a cable from Brussels, the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Michael Froman gives an admiring assessment of the basic countries' tactics of opposition. It is remarkable how closely coordinated the basic group has become in international fora, taking turns to impede U.S.-EU initiatives and playing the U.S. and EU off against each other. Basic countries have widely differing interests, but have subordinated these to their common short-term goals. The U.S. and EU need to learn from this coordination and work much more closely and effectively together ourselves to better handle third country obstructionism, read not what we want to do, and avoid future train wrecks on climate, Doha, or financial regulatory reform. The U.S. courted Brazil both before and after the Copenhagen debacle, apparently believing it to be the most amenable of the basic bloc. In June 2009, the embassy in Brasilia has identified a clear opportunity to nudge the development of Brazil's negotiating position in a more positive direction, according to a cable. And once again, money is the potential lubricant. Getting as many countries as possible to associate themselves with a climate accord strongly served U.S. interests by boosting the likelihood it would be officially adopted. A diplomatic offensive was launched. Diplomatic cables flew thick and fast between the end of Copenhagen in December 2009 and late February 2010 when the leaked cables end. Some countries needed a little persuading. The accord promised $30 billion in aid for the poorest nations hit by global warming they had not caused. Within 2 weeks of Copenhagen, the Maldives Foreign Minister Ahmed Shahid wrote to U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton expressing eagerness to back it. The Maldives were unusual among developing countries in embracing the accord so wholeheartedly, but other small island nations were secretly seen as vulnerable to financial pressure, i.e. bribing. Any linking of the billions of dollars of aid to political support is extremely controversial. Nations most threatened by climate change see the aid as a right, not a reward, and such a link is heretical. But on the 11th of February, Jonathan Pershing met the EU Climate Action Commissioner, Connie Hedegaard, in Brussels, where she told him, according to a cable, the alliance of small island states could be our best allies given their need for financing. Trust is in short supply on both sides of the developing nation divide. On the 2nd of February 2009, a cable from Addis Ababa reports a meeting between U.S. Undersecretary of State Maria Otero and the Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, who heads the African Union's climate change negotiations. The confidential cable records a blunt U.S. threat to Zenawi: sign the accord or discussion ends now. Zenawi responds that Ethiopia will support the accord but has a concern of his own that a personal assurance from Barack Hussein Obama on delivering the promised aid finance is not being honored. Perhaps the most audacious appeal for funds revealed in the cables is from Saudi Arabia, the world's second biggest oil producer and one of the 25 richest countries in the world. A secret cable sent on the 12th of February records a meeting between U.S. embassy officials and lead climate change negotiator Mohammed El Saban. The kingdom will need time to diversify its economy away from petroleum, he said, noting a U.S. commitment to help Saudi Arabia with its economic diversification efforts would take the pressure off the climate change negotiations. In other words, bribe us, grease our palm, and we'll go along. The Saudis did not like the accord, but were worried they had missed a trick. The Assistant Petroleum Minister, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, told U.S. officials that he had told his minister, Ali al-Naimi, that Saudi Arabia had missed a real opportunity to submit something clever, like India or China, that was not legally binding, but indicated some goodwill towards the process without compromising key economic interests. So there's all kinds of wheeling and dealing going on here. As far as I'm concerned, most of our international aid is a waste of time as it goes to corrupt governments or corrupt organizations like the IMF or the United Nations, which only have a two-pronged agenda. Number one, redistribute as much income as possible, and number two, some sort of global world order. How many tens of billions have we sent to Africa over the past few decades to combat AIDS or other diseases or genocide with little results? Now we're using this as leverage for the creation of a global world order where you will be responsible to some unelected bureaucrat. These climate conferences are not about science. They are about deals made in smoke-filled backrooms, redistribution of income, and power grabs by bureaucrats who do not have to answer to U.S. voters. And lastly, I will leave you with this. Evidence of a medieval warm period in Antarctica. In a paper published in July 2010 issue of Geology, authors note that 1. Over the past 50 years, the Antarctic Peninsula has warmed about 2 degrees centigrade. 2. Rapid breakups have destroyed several small, thin ice shelves fringing the Antarctic Peninsula. And 3. Removal of ice shelf back pressure resulted in a marked increase in seaward flow of glaciers discharging into the new abandoned embayments, leading them to ask a most important question. Is the recent warming of the Antarctic Peninsula unique in the Holocene? In an attempt to answer this question, the 3 researchers examined organic rich sediments exposed by a recent retreat of the Mare Ice Piedmont on western Anvers Island near Norsel Point, where they say that glaciers have been undergoing considerable retreat in response to the well-documented warming, which led to their sampling area being deglaciated about 6 years ago. And based on what they found and describe as the first record of terrestrial organic material exposed by recently retreating ice that bears on past glacier extent and climate in this sensitive region, the researchers conclude that ice was at or behind its present position in about 700 to 970 AD, and during the at least 2 earlier times represented by the dates of the shells in the mid to late Holocene, which means, in their words, that the present state of reduced ice on the western Antarctic Peninsula is not unprecedented, even within the last 1,000 years, where findings stands in stark contrast to the long-held claim of the IPCC that late 20th century warmth was globally unprecedented over the past 1 to 2 millennia. This finding thus prompted the U.S. scientists to ask another important question. How widespread is the event at 700 to 970 AD, the medieval warm period? Starting first with the Antarctic Peninsula itself, they write that dates of moss adjacent to the present ice front in the South Shetland Islands indicate that ice there was no more extensive between 650 and 825 AD than it is now. And lastly, they reported that evidence for this warming at this time seemed restricted to the western Antarctic Peninsula and is seen best in some, although not all, marine cores. All these observations suggest, in their words, that at least in the western and northern Antarctic Peninsula area, the warmth they discovered is not an anomalous event. So this has happened before. You can cancel the apocalypse. No need to lose sleep and wring your hands over this. And again, I'll have all the links underneath the video. Peruse them at your leisure. So we've learned here that these climate agreements is more about greasing the skids for global control, and our government and other governments will use aid as a bludgeon. You will do what we want you to do, or there will be no foreign aid. And personally, if I had two choices, to keep foreign aid as we have it now or get rid of all of it, I'd take the latter. I'd get rid of all of it because it's ineffective. It makes nations dependent on us. It's like, instead of teaching someone to fish, we just give them a fish. I think most of it's ineffective. So ending that would lessen the chances of backroom deals being made at these climate conferences, because they are a joke. And lastly, the medieval warm period in Antarctica. It's happened before, people. No need to lose any sleep. Have a nice day, and don't thank me now.